Story 1. It was Christmas Eve, and the house was quiet except for the soft rustling of wrapping paper and the occasional whisper of snow against the windows. I was a single mother of 3 boys, navigating the holidays alone after my partner, and I had separated earlier that year. It had been a difficult decision, but it was the right one for us. Still, the weight of preparing for Christmas without help was heavy. My oldest son, Alex, who was 15 at the time, had stayed up late with me to wrap presents for his younger brothers, who were 8 and 10. We were a team, and I was grateful for his help. By 2 a.m., we were finally done. The living room was a sea of neatly wrapped gifts, and the tree glowed softly in the corner. I was placing the last present under the tree when Alex tapped me on the shoulder. His face was pale, and his eyes were wide with alarm. Without saying a word, he pointed toward the living room window. My heart skipped a beat as I turned to look. The window was dark, reflecting the warm glow of the Christmas lights inside. At first, I saw nothing but the faint outline of snow falling outside. But then, as I leaned closer, I noticed it, a shadowy figure standing just beyond the glass, peering in. My breath caught in my throat. Someone was out there, watching us. I froze for a moment, my mind racing. Growing up, I had always been taught to stay calm in situations like this. Panicking wouldn't help. I took a deep breath and motioned for Alex to stay close. Together, we moved toward the front door. I grabbed a heavy flashlight from the hallway, not exactly a weapon, but it would have to do. My heart pounded as I unlocked the door and stepped outside. Alex right behind me. The cold night air hit me like a wall, and the snow crunched under my feet. The figure was still there, standing a few feet away from the window. As my eyes adjusted to the darkness, I could see that it was a woman. She was dressed in a dark coat, her face partially hidden by a hood. But what struck me most were her eyes. They were wide and unblinking, almost unnaturally so. There was something deeply unsettling about her presence. "Can I help you?" I called out, my voice steady despite the fear creeping up my spine. The woman didn't respond at first. She just stared at us, her head tilted slightly, as if she were studying us. Finally, she spoke. "I'm sorry," she said, her voice soft and oddly flat. "I was just trying to scare my friend. I thought this was their house." Her explanation didn't make sense. It was the middle of the night, and the snow was falling heavily. Why would she be out here, trying to scare someone? I didn't buy it, but I wasn't about to argue with her. "You have the wrong house," I said firmly. "You need to leave." The woman nodded slowly, still staring at us with those unsettling eyes. "Okay," she said. "I'll go." She turned and walked away, but not without glancing back at us several times. Alex and I watched until she disappeared into the darkness, her footprints trailing behind her in the snow. We went back inside, locking the door behind us. Alex was quiet, his face pale. "Mom," he said finally. There was something wrong with her. Did you see her eyes? I nodded. I had seen them too. They were hollow, almost lifeless, and they left me with a feeling of dread that lingered long after she was gone. We never saw her again, but that night stayed with us. To this day, I can't shake the feeling that she wasn't just a lost stranger. There was something darker, something we couldn't understand about her presence that night. Story 2, growing up in a small Midwestern town. Life was predictable. The seasons dictated everything: when the crops were planted, when they were harvested, and when the migrant workers would come and go. But in the winter, when the fields were barren and the snow piled high, the town became eerily quiet. It was during one of these winters, in the late 90s, that something happened that I'll never forget. I was about 13 at the time, and a group of my friends and I were having a sleepover at my friend Jake's house. Jake's dad was ex-military, and he had all sorts of cool gear lying around, including a pair of night vision goggles. That night, we decided to play a game of Army Scouts, taking turns using the goggles to spy on the snowy landscape outside. At first, it was just fun. The snow looked magical through the goggles, and we laughed as we pretended to spot enemy forces in the distance. But then, something caught our attention. Through the goggles, we could see a faint light coming from the attic of the abandoned house next door. The house had been empty for months, ever since the family who lived there had suddenly moved away. No one knew why they left, but the house had been deserted ever since. The light in the attic was flickering, like a candle struggling to stay lit. We took turns looking through the goggles, trying to figure out what was going on. "Someone's in there," one of my friends whispered. We all felt it, a mix of curiosity and fear. What if it was a squatter? Or something worse? We decided to investigate. We bundled up in our warmest clothes, pulling on black gloves and beanies to blend into the night. We felt like a little paramilitary unit, sneaking through the woods toward the house. The snow muffled our footsteps, and the cold bit at our faces as we approached. When we reached the house, we could see the flickering light more clearly. It was coming from the attic window, and it was definitely a candle. We stood there, shivering, as we watched shadows move across the window. Someone or something was up there. We didn't dare go inside that night. The house was too creepy, and we were just kids. But the next morning, we went back. The light was gone, and the house looked as abandoned as ever. We found a loose window and slipped inside, our hearts pounding. The house was empty, just as we expected. The walls were bare, and the floors were covered in dust. But when we opened the attic door, a cold wind rushed past us, sending chills down our spines. We climbed up the ladder, and what we saw will haunt me forever. In the center of the attic was a wooden crucifix, and nailed to it was a lamb. Its body was bloody and mutilated, and the smell was overwhelming. At the foot of the crucifix were 2 burnt-out candles, their wax pooled on the floor. We screamed and scrambled back down the ladder, running out of the house as fast as we could. We told Jake's dad, who called the police. They investigated, but nothing ever came of it. To this day, I don't know who or what was in that house that night, but I'll never forget the sight of that sacrificed lamb, or the feeling that we had stumbled into something far darker than we could have imagined. Story 3, Christmas Eve 2020, was supposed to be a happy night. My brother Blake and I had driven 2 hours to spend the holiday with our parents. Our mom's birthday was on Christmas Day, so we always celebrated on the 24th. That year, we were especially grateful to be together after a difficult year. The evening was perfect: cake, presents, and Christmas movies. But around 9 p.m., as we were relaxing in the living room, there was a loud knock at the door. We weren't expecting anyone, and the sound sent a chill down my spine. I could see a figure through the frosted glass of the door, but I couldn't make out who it was. My dad, half asleep on the couch, got up to answer the door. I tried to stop him, but it was too late. He opened the door, and standing there was an older man, maybe in his 60s. He looked disheveled, and his eyes were wild. "She's here," he said, his voice trembling. "I need to see her. Linda has my medicine." My dad tried to explain that no one named Linda lived here, but the man wasn't listening. He pushed past my dad, forcing his way into the house. Blake and I jumped up, trying to help my dad push him back out. The man was surprisingly strong, and it took all 4 of us to finally get the door closed and locked. The man started banging on the door, screaming for Linda. I called 911 while my mom grabbed a rolling pin from the kitchen. We watched through the security camera as the man paced back and forth, yelling and pounding on the door. It felt like an eternity before the police arrived. When they did, we learned that the man was the ex-husband of our new neighbor, Linda. He had gone to her house to get his medicine, but had somehow ended up at ours, convinced that Linda was inside. The police let him go with a warning, but the experience left us shaken. That night, I realized how quickly things can go wrong, even on a night that's supposed to be filled with joy. I'm just grateful that Blake and I were there to help our parents. If we hadn't been, I don't know what might have happened. Story 4, Christmas morning, 2011, started like any other. I was 7 years old, living with my aunt and uncle, and I was beyond excited to open my presents. The living room was a winter wonderland, with gifts stacked under the tree and the smell of cinnamon rolls in the air. After opening presents, we started cleaning up. That's when I saw something out of the corner of my eye. 2 pairs of shoes walking up the stairs. I thought it was Santa and ran to the stairs, pointing and shouting, "Santa's here." My aunt and uncle laughed at first, but then my aunt looked up and saw someone hiding in the guest bedroom. She screamed, and my uncle called the police. The intruder was gone by the time they arrived, but we later discovered that someone had been living in our house for weeks, eating our food and sleeping in the attic. The police found no evidence, but 2 weeks later, my uncle discovered knives stabbed into the wall of the upstairs closet, along with food wrappers and a sleeping bag. It was clear that the intruder had been there for a while, and the thought of someone living in our house without us knowing still gives me chills. That Christmas taught me that danger can lurk in the most unexpected places, even in the safety of your own home. It's a lesson I'll never forget.